Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare related material where I attempt to answer a question from a reader, listener or viewer. You can ask a question, you can send us an email, you can comment on a previous video or podcast, you can send me a postcard, PO Box 222 Belfield 2191 Australia. That will get to me. You can shout in the street. And this current question is from Clapspatten Kamikaze. I hope I'm saying that right. Clapspatten. Yes, I think Clapspatten Kamikaze. Not really a question. It's a response to a previous answer I gave, which simply says, now I want to know more about signaling, and I am happy to oblige. Of course, you can back us on Patreon, one of three different levels, Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. Right, much of what I'm about to say comes from this book by DJ Woolscroft, Roman Military Signaling. Okay, so there's several things. Now, often when we're talking about military signaling, it's sort of tied up with the idea of encryption, and we've got lots of examples, the ciphers and things like that, in evidence from Herodotus onwards and Julius Caesar and things like that. And there's been articles in the magazine about ciphers and encryption in code messages and things like that. And there is indeed encryption all the way through. There's a fabulous example of quite complex encryption going on by the besieged in Amida in 359 AD. With Ammianus gives this fabulous discussion of them decoding the message, but then the message is written allegorically, and they have to work out what the allegories mean as well as, so it's layers of encryption. So if you think of about, two-party encryption, it's not new. It goes back to the Roman Empire. Anyway, Roman signaling is tied up with encryption, but generally speaking, our evidence of it is not. And I'll get to that. So there's two major forms of signaling that we get. One is flag signaling and the second is fire signaling. Put those to one side. The other thing that we have mentioned, and again, Ammianus Marcellinus comes in and some other sources, talk about signaling with a hand signal or signaling with a wave of the cloak, which is fascinating, but they don't give us any more information. Ammianus, for instance, talks about the usual signal. And at various points we get the usual signal. And of course, in Roman armies, you have orders, and they are given by signals, usually the instruments that accompany the army. Same in Greek armies, we've got the aulos and other things. And we think they mean things when they're played. Obviously, HBO's Rome had a whistle, no evidence of a whistle in history. But the idea, of course, that shouted orders couldn't be heard. So how do you signal them? Possibly flags, lowering and hiring of flags is possible, which brings us to flag signaling and fire signaling. Now, there's two major pieces of evidence for signaling in the Roman world. One is Polybius, and the other one is Sextus Julius Africanus in a work written in the late 2nd, early 3rd century AD called the Kestoi. Now, what Polybius gives us is a flag signaling system using 5 sets of flags in 2 groups. So, sorry, I'm showing up both hands, people listening on the podcast. 2 sets of 5 flags. What you do, and it works just as well for the Greek alphabet as it does for the Latin alphabet, even though we're normally told about these things with the Greek alphabet. And so, of course, the Greek alphabet and the Latin alphabet, 24, 25 letters. So in the Polybius system, you have 5 groups of 5 letters. And so, and again, the way that Polybius describes it, it's just alpha to omega. But, so there's no encryption. So the first group of flags, so flag 1 indicates alpha, beta, delta, gamma, epsilon, I think. So flag set 1 to 5 tells you which group of 5 letters. The second set of flags tells you which letter in the group. So flag 1 tells you alpha. Flag 1, flag 2 tells you beta. So you can code a message to say whatever you would like to say with that system. Now, we know from Thucydides, who doesn't tell us how, but he tells us the contents of some messages that they're quite complicated, that they're not just the enemy, is here, jumping forward in time to a set of fire signals during the Armada, fear of the Armada in 1588. There's a set of fire signals on the coast of Britain, and one meant, the enemy, two meant, wow, really panic, and three meant, oh my gosh, they're here. So a very simple kind of fire signaling that was, like like the torches of Minas Tirith the Lit. If they're on, we go. That's the simplest version of the message. But in Thucydides and others, the messages are quite complicated. 300 of the enemy have arrived, sort of, at the port. That would require quite some time to actually send that message. Estimates would say you could get maybe, it's not 100 words a minute. No, it's not 100 words a minute. I'm not sure how, I can't remember. That it's going to be quite meticulous and slow to get those signals out that way, especially because there's no encryption. Now, if you encrypt that flag system, you're obviously going to assign the most common letters to the least number of flags. So alpha remains A1. Epsilon, rather than being 1-5, could be 2-1, for instance, saying that A and E are common. Omicron could be 3-1, for instance. Most common letters. Now, of course, the problem with that is if you're doing it with flags and the enemy can see it, if they know the Greek alphabet, they can decipher your code. The other thing, of course, is if you encrypt it beyond just most common to a randomized system, and there is little evidence, but there is some evidence of randomized codes. That one I was talking about for Ammianus Marcellinus at Amida seems to be a complex encryption, but we'll get to that. You've obviously got a system that can't be broken unless you know the decipher code. And we've got evidence in Aeneas Tacticus, the astragal, which is the sheep knuckle sewn with the letters in particular places. Here. So there is complex encryption going on. The flags, of course, visible and probably therefore difficult to, jam, because it's visible. Unlike signaling at night by fire signal. Now, Polybius's flag system can be used for fires at night. 2 sets of 5 fires. The problem that you've got is the visibility of how far away you can be to differentiate the 5. If you can just see, which depends on arguments, 10 kilometers maybe, if it's a clear night, all that sort of thing. And again, when you look at things like Hadrian's Wall, where you've got turrets 500 meters apart, they're obviously going to be able to tell what the signal is. But we'll get to that. Have I got what time? Oh, no, I'm already 10 minutes over. Fire signals. And this is what brings in the Kestoi, because he doesn't use 5, he uses 3. So he divides the alphabet into 3 sets of 8 letters, which gives you 24 letters, and therefore only needing one group of 3 to give you A to G, and the second set telling you which one in the order. So his system's simpler because it's got less letters. It's also interesting in the sense that it is, again, described to us basically that the letters are in alphabetical order. There's no most commonly used letter. There's no, any further encryption, which is probable that they would have had further encryption. Now, I've just remembered I've written about this in Ancient Warfare magazine. Can I remember where? This is the question. Let me see if I can find it. I'm searching my own CV as we talk about it. 2009, gosh, Ancient Warfare 3.6. Gosh, that was a long time ago. If you want to look that one up, you can find that on the archive. So the interesting thing there is you've got this system which can be encrypted. Now, with fire signaling, and we've got, again evidence from Thucydides, you can jam those signals by confusingly lighting fires so that the people reading the signal get confused because there's more fires than there should be. And hang on, is that 3? Is that 2? Is that 1? I can't tell. And of course, at night from a distance, a fire lit near a signaling fire might confuse you because you can't tell how close it is in comparison. So you couldn't be sure of the signal. Now that brings us to my controversial idea, which is that there's a certain set of coins from the 4th century called Campgate coins, which seem to show a turret, and on top of them they have what look like Weber barbecue kettles, which are generally called turrets, but they don't look like a turret. And I argued that those, I think, are signaling fires, and that there's 3 of them on most of them. Some have 4. But the 3 ones, you've got a left, a right, and a center. And so if you take, for instance, Hadrian's Wall, you could quite easily have 3 turrets on top of one of these, 3 signaling fires on top of one of these turrets. They're generally, 3 to 5 meters a length of wall, so they're 1.5 meters apart. So at 500 meters or maybe a little bit longer, you can see the difference between 1, 2, and 3 and where they are. So that's fascinating. And so you've essentially got a pseudo early Morse code. So first flash is which group, second flash is which letter in that group, and so on and so forth. So is it 10 letters a minute? It might be 10 letters a minute, I think, is the sort of system. So it's quite cumbersome and slow. Can be sped up by decreasing the number of flashes or flags required for the most common letters, which does take a bit of intuition to sort of say that. And then a further encryption is another one. I did publish an article in the Journal of Indo-European Studies where I argued that the order of the Futhark, the runic Futhark, where the first letters are Futhark, which is not the normal first order of an alphabet, may have come from a Roman encryption tool saying this is the order of the letters today. So flash 1 is F, flash 1 is U, and that's how the order of the Germanic Futhark came about. One reason for that is that the Germanic Futhark is 24 letters, split into 3 groups of 8 called ets. Oh, so it's very similar to the system that Julius Africanus describes in the Kestoi. But I have diverged well beyond. But that's Roman signaling in a very overflowing nutshell. So join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.